There are over 25,000 unique cards in Magic the Gathering, and while there's nothing wrong with running only the most efficient cards in your commander deck, using an underplayed card instead can help your deck feel more unique and thematic. And who knows, it might even save you some cash or power up your deck in a unique and interesting way. Today, I want to share 5 underrated black removal spells. Black is a very strong color for removal, though it has traditionally struggled when it comes to answering both artifacts and enchantments. Perhaps that's why Feed the Swarm shows up as Black's most popular single target removal spell on EDH Rec, with over 500,000 listed decks. In 60 card formats, this is much less of an issue, as Black has access to hand disruption spells like Thoughtseize that can essentially get rid of problematic cards before your opponents can ever cast them. Sadly, these cards translate poorly to multiplayer formats, as they only target a single player and there's no way of knowing which of your opponents is sitting on the card that you can't otherwise answer. With that in mind, I've put together a list of 5 underrated black removal spells that appear in about 20,000 decks or less on EDH Rec, hidden gems that might make your deck a little more unique. Starting with Extract a Confession. Extract a Confession is a 2-mana sorcery spell that costs 1 generic and 1 black mana. It reads, as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect Evidence 6. Each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. If evidence was collected, instead each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. Printed in the largely unpopular set Murders at Karlov Manor, Extract a Confession shows up in just under 5,000 decks on EDH Rec. Coming from a set that many players basically skipped, it's no surprise that Extract a Confession isn't seeing much play. But forcing your opponents to sacrifice their strongest creature is an extremely powerful effect that we don't see on many cards, and never on cards that only cost 2 mana. Crackling Doom is probably the best comparison here, but despite having a much stricter color requirement and costing 1 more mana, it still shows up in nearly 50,000 decks on EDH Rec. Soul Shatter is also worth mentioning, though it hits creatures based on mana value and not power. Still, it's listed in nearly 80,000 decks on EDH Rec. My point is that, despite being stuck at sorcery speed, Extract a Confession deserves consideration in way more black decks. The Collect Evidence 6 is usually trivial and gets around both indestructible and hexproof. I personally play it in several of my decks and am always happy to have it in hand. Moving on, let's talk about a more unusual spell, Rancid Earth. Rancid Earth is a 3-mana sorcery spell with around 700 decks on EDH Rec. It costs 1 generic and 2 black mana and reads, Destroy target land. It also has Threshold. If 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, instead destroy that land and Rancid Earth deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Every commander deck needs to be able to destroy lands. In my opinion, lands in Commander have become so undeniably powerful that we as players need to normalize single target land destruction. And I'm not just talking about the absolutely busted lands, like Field of the Dead, Gaia's Cradle, Glacial Chasm, or Cabal Coffers. Even more innocuous lands, like Rogue's Passage, Kessig Wolfrun, or Maze of Ith, can completely take over a game. Having an answer for these cards has never been more important. Of course, Rancid Earth isn't just a land removal spell. At 3 mana, it's slightly overcosted compared to cards like Sinkhole, Assassin's Trophy, or Cleansing Wildfire. But I actually really like its Threshold ability. Threshold is extremely easy to achieve in Commander, meaning most of the time, Rancid Earth will deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. While this won't answer every creature, it's great at clearing away an army of Scute Swarms or Goblins, or getting rid of other small chump blockers, mana dorks, or value creatures like Esper Sentinel. You could even use this post-combat to clean up a creature with near-lethal damage marked on it. Better yet, this fits perfectly in any deck that's already taking advantage of damage dealt to your own creatures. In other words, don't underestimate a single point of damage in Commander. Stapled onto a land destruction spell, I'm confident this card will never be dead in hand. Next up is Fowl Renewal, a 3 generic and 1 black mana instant spell that appears in around 1800 decks on EDH Rec. And 4 mana is a lot for a removal spell, but in the right deck, Fowl Renewal is definitely worth it. Fowl Renewal reads, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the toughness of the card returned this way. Now, unlike some of the other cards I've mentioned so far, I don't think you can jam Fowl Renewal in just any black deck. You need a deck with either a big commander or a deck that can consistently get big creatures into your graveyard. In these decks, Fowl Renewal should be able to answer most problematic creatures while returning a threat from your graveyard to hand. Fowl Renewal is especially good in decks looking to take advantage of permanents leaving their graveyard. You can make a creature token with cards like Taval the Balanced Scale and Insidious Roots, drain the table with Soul Enervation or Sir Conrad, or even draw some cards with Chalk Outline or Kishla Skimmer. Number 4, I want to talk about a card that reads so much worse than it actually plays. Witch's Mist. Witch's Mist is a 3-mana enchantment that costs 2 generic and 1 black mana. It appears in only 400 decks on EDH Rec and has just one ability. Pay 2 generic and 1 black mana and tap this enchantment to destroy target creature that was dealt damage this turn. Now, I know at first glance this card seems extremely weak. I mean, to kill a single creature you're spending 6 total mana, and that creature must be damaged in some other way first? That's a lot to ask, but in practice, I found this card plays better than you'd think as a political tool. In fact, this card is most effective when you never have to use its ability. The key is to be proactive with it. Make a deal with one player to not attack you and instead swing out at another of your opponents. In exchange, you won't kill their creatures when they take damage that turn. You can even threaten to kill any blocking creatures that would otherwise be a problem. I'm actually quite a big fan of rattlesnake cards like this, that provide onboard removal that's visible to all players. Beyond just being a political tool, Witch's Mist also pairs extremely well with creatures that have First Strike or Double Strike, as you can activate it after the First Strike damage has been dealt to destroy a creature before going to regular damage. Similarly, any deck built around ping effects can easily use Witch's Mist as a repeatable, albeit expensive, removal option. One more thing I'll mention. If you want to build a deck that can really abuse Witch's Mist, you'll want to include some other mana sinks. Just a few more ways you can dump your mana if you don't need to use it on Witch's Mist. In any case, I'm confident that there are far more than 400 decks that could benefit from this unique enchantment. Finally, I want to mention an even more unpopular black removal spell, Spinning Darkness, which appears in just 377 decks on EDH Rec. Despite being the most mana-intensive spell on this list, at 4 generic and 2 black mana, you'll almost never pay that mana to cast Spinning Darkness. And that's because Spinning Darkness has an alternative casting cost. You may exile the top 3 black cards of your graveyard rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Spinning Darkness deals 3 damage to target non-black creature, you gain 3 life. Now, there's a lot to unpack with this card. First, your deck needs to be heavily in black, so that you can be sure you'll even have 3 black cards to exile from your graveyard to cast the spell for free. Second, it can only hit non-black creatures, unlike a card like Soul Spike, which can hit any creature or player. Still, at instant speed, a potentially free removal spell is worth considering in my opinion. Obviously, any graveyard deck that is primarily in black could use this card, but I think Spinning Darkness works best in a life gain deck that has more ways to take advantage of gaining life. Commanders like Tavash, Gloom Summoner, Amalia, or Willowdusk Essence Seer, for example. Alternatively, Spinning Darkness works great in a Mana Value Matters deck, where you want high-cost cards that you can cast for cheap to take advantage of things like Ancient Cellar Spawn or Keen Duelist. Vile Smasher the Fierce, Yuriko the Tiger Shadow, and Hidetsugu Devouring Chaos all come to mind. In any of these strategies, you're using Spinning Darkness as more than just a removal spell, meaning its downsides are much less important. Okay, before we wrap up this video, I had to include one honorable mention. Gate to Phyrexia. For 2 black mana, Gate to Phyrexia has one ability. Sacrifice a creature to destroy target artifact. Activate only during your upkeep and only once each turn. Despite being black's best answer to artifacts, Gate to Phyrexia only sees play in 2400 decks on EDH Rec. And that's largely because of the price. At over $50 and with limited supply available for purchase, it just isn't easy to get your hands on a copy. That said, if money is no object and you've got a deck that doesn't mind sacrificing its own creatures, Gate to Phyrexia is an incredibly strong and incredibly unique black removal spell. At any rate, I want to know what you think of this list. Are there any cards you're thinking of trying out in one of your decks? Did I leave out your favorite black removal spell? Let me know in the comments below and make sure to like and subscribe to help my channel grow.